There are lots of ways that you can make a song or a piece of music sound completely unique and original on the piano. But one of the best ways to make something sound completely unique is by doing something called reharmonization. And reharmonization is just where you take the chords that are originally in a song and you change them. Doing this can change people's expectations of a piece of music. It can change how the piece of music feels. And most importantly, it can make a song sound like your own. So today I'm going to show you exactly how you can reharmonize any song. And I'm going to leave the notes that I used to make this video in the description to download for completely free. So let's get into it. So firstly, in order to reharmonize a song, we need two things. The first thing is the melody for that song, and the second thing is the scale that that song uses. Now, fortunately, if we're working the song out by ear, we can work out the scale from the melody by working out the melody on the piano and then working out which scale includes all of the notes that are in your melody. If you want to know more about how to work out melodies and scales by ear, then I will leave a link in the description to a video that I did about learning songs by ear. But for the purposes of reharmonization, I'm going to be using something called a lead sheet. Now, a lead sheet is a piece of music that has just the melody with the chords written above it, and it will also tell us the scale. So this is actually going to give us all the information we need in order to be able to reharmonize the piece of music. So the first thing that we actually need to do is work out what the chords are that we can use. And for this, I'm going to use the song Heaven by Bryan Adams. Now, in a C major scale, we can form a triad chord by playing every other note in the scale. And we can actually form one of these chords starting on every single note in the scale, which means we have 7 possible options of triads that we can play. So in this particular piece, it starts on chord 1 because that starts on note number 1 in the scale. And then the second chord is chord 6 because it starts on an A, and A is note number 6 in the scale. And then we go to a G chord, which is chord number 5. Then we get a D minor chord, which is chord number 2, an A minor chord, which is chord number 6 again, and then chord number 5 again, which is a G chord. And those are the chords that currently make up this song. So firstly, I would never normally recommend playing chords in the left hand, and the reason for this is because if you play chords in the left hand, if you go too low down, it can start to sound muddy quite quickly. So in the left hand, I always recommend to play a bass note, and this can just be the root note of the chord. So if we're playing a C chord, then just play a C. This way you can play the chords in the right hand and it won't sound so muddy. In order to be able to play the melody in the right hand as well, firstly what I would recommend doing is taking out all of the chord notes altogether to start with and just playing the bass note with the melody. Once you're comfortable and able to do that, then you can start adding some chord notes back in at the same time that you're playing the bass note. And that doesn't need to be all 3 of the notes. That can be a C, an E, and a G. It could be an E and a G. It could be a C and a G. It could be a C and an E. Whatever combination of the notes you can manage or reach at the time is absolutely fine. So that's using the original chords, but I'm going to give you 4 ways in which to choose your own chords for this piece of music. The first way to do this is to choose another chord in the same scale that includes the same melody note. And this is when it starts to become more important knowing where the chords actually line up with the melody notes. For example, in this particular song, the second chord that we have is an A minor chord, and that happens at the same time that we play a G in the melody. Now, if we look at the scale, there are actually 3 chords there that include a G. We have chord 1, which is a C chord, we have chord 3, which is an E chord, and we have chord 5, which is a G chord. All 3 of those chords include the note G. And because we have a G in the melody at the time that we play that chord, all of those should work. So firstly, we could choose chord 1 to replace this chord, and that's a C chord. So we would effectively be going from a C chord to another C chord, which might sound a little bit boring, but it does work. The second option that we have is chord number 3, which is an E chord, and that would sound like this. Now, that also works, and it has a very different quality of sound to both the C major chord and to the chord that is used in the original song, which is an A minor chord. The third option that we have that includes that melody note of a G is a G major chord, so that would sound like this. Once again, that has a completely different quality of sound, and because G is a major chord rather than the A minor that's in the original song, or E minor, which is chord 3 using this scale, it has a much more bright, positive sound to it opposed to those minor chords. So for this example, I'm going to choose that G major chord because that gives it some brightness. Now, also interestingly, the first chord in this piece of music doesn't have a melody note underneath it. The melody note comes in after the chord. So at that point, we can effectively play whichever chord we like the sound of from the scale. So I'm going to choose an F chord to play at the beginning. So those two chords would sound like this. Now, the second way that we can use in order to choose new chords is by moving our bass by stepwise motion, and then choosing a chord that fits with that new bass note. So at the beginning of this song, now I have the notes F and then G, which are moving by step within the scale. If I carry on that pattern, I'm going to get the note A. So I can play an A chord as the third chord, and that should work because we're moving that bass by one step at a time, and that means that our ear has got something to latch onto and it won't sound so unusual, even if the melody note isn't actually in the chord. So that would give us this. The third way that we can pick new chords is by just changing the bass note of the original chord. For example, if we have a C major chord, this chord is made up of the notes C, E, and G. Now, this means that we don't necessarily need to have the note C in the bass. We could have the note E or G in the bass instead. And each of these notes has a very different quality of sound. If we have the middle note of the chord in the bass, it sounds a little bit weaker and more longing, whereas if we have the top note in the chord in the bass instead, so a G, that sounds also a little bit more weak, but it has a bit more strength to it. So we don't necessarily need to change the original chord at all. We could just change the bass note to another note that's in that chord. So for the next chord in this song, which is a D minor chord, instead of playing a D minor with a D in the bass, I might play a D minor with an F in the bass, because that's the middle note of the chord, and that gives it a slightly weaker texture. So far, that's 3 ways we can pick new chords. The first one is by choosing another chord that includes the melody note. The second way was to move by step in the bass and then choose a chord that includes that new bass note. And the third way is to just use the original chord but change which note of that chord is in the bass. Now, the fourth way is the best way of creating texture within a piece of music, and that is to turn the original chord into something called a 7th by changing the bass note. Now, normally when we play a chord, we have 3 notes, and that in C major's case would be C, E, and G. And normally we would have a C in the bass. But if I lower this bass note by 2 notes, now I've got the notes A, C, E, and G, and this actually turns the chord into a 7th. And this is a really quick and effective way of creating a completely different texture in the music, because all you need to do is go to play the note you're originally going to play, and instead play 2 notes lower. So if we take the next chord that we have in this piece of music, which is an A minor chord, normally we'd have an A in the bass, but if I'm playing 2 notes lower, instead I'm going to play an F in the bass, and this makes an F major 7 chord instead of an A minor chord, which is a completely different sound. For the remaining chord of this piece of music, I'm going to change the G chord to a D chord, and that's because there's a D in the melody, and there is a D in a D chord. So here I've used the first way in which we can pick a chord. However, in order to make it sound finished, I'm also going to throw the original chord onto the end of that by adding the G chord after the D chord. So in its entirety, you would get this. And if you are a player that is comfortable with chords and you have lots of chord patterns that you can use, then it might turn into something more advanced like this. Now, in a real-world performance situation, there are a couple of things to consider when you might want to change the chord. The first one is when you want to play with expectation. And if you want to do this, I would always tend to play the original chords first, because then you are setting the expectation that you're going to do a normal piano cover of that song. And then when you change the chords, then it kind of surprises the listener and makes them really intrigued with how you're playing it. Another reason that you might want to change the chords is if you're wanting to create a completely different style of a piece of music. For example, if a song uses a lot of minor chords and it sounds very dark and depressing, and you want to create a more longing, introspective type of sound. Then you might use major chords instead. And not only that, but you might change that major chord to play the middle note of the chord in the bass, because that creates that longing kind of sound. So if the melody note was an A, for example, and the chord was a D minor chord, we could change that to an F major chord because that also has an A, but we could play an A in the bass because that's the middle note of the chord. That's just a few things to consider as to when you might want to change the chords in a song. But here is a few other examples for you. So here is the song Easy on Me by Adele. Now this song uses the scale of F major, which is the notes F, G, A, B flat, C, D and E. And the chords for this are an F chord, which is chord 1. Then it's a D minor chord, which is chord number 6. Then we have a C chord, which is chord number 5. And then a B flat chord, which is chord number 4. And the melody goes like this. Now, if I was going to change the chords for this, I might change the first chord so that it's another chord that includes that melody note, which is an F. So the other chords that include an F are a B flat chord and a D minor chord. So I might choose a B flat chord for this. And for the second chord, I might keep that exactly the same as the original and play a D minor chord. For the third chord, I might also choose a different chord that uses that same melody note, which is an F. So this time I might play an F chord with that F. And then the last chord, which is a B flat chord, I might keep exactly the same. So that would give me this. And if I was to play the original chords first to set the expectation, and then play them again with my set of chords, it might sound like this. Another example is the song Stay by Justin Bieber. Now, the scale that this song uses is a D flat major scale, and those notes are D flat, E flat, F, G flat, A flat, B flat, C. And the chords are G flat, which is chord 4, A flat, which is chord 5, B flat, which is chord 6, and then we get an F chord, which is chord number 3. So that would go something like this. Now for this, I might change this first chord by dropping that note down 2 notes to change it into a 7th. And then for the other 3 chords, I might just move the bass note up by Stepwise Motion. And once again, if I was to play the original chords to start with, followed by my new set of chords, I might get this. Another example is the song Fix You by Coldplay. Now, the scale that this song uses is an E flat major scale, which is the notes E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat, C, and D. And the chords it uses is chord 1, which is an E flat major chord, chord 3, which is a G minor chord, chord 6, which is a C minor chord, and chord 5, which is a B flat major chord. So using the original chords, that would go like this. Now for this one, for the first chord, I might change it so I'm playing the same chord, but instead I'm playing the middle note from the chord, which is a G. For the second chord, I might move down a step. Now, moving down a step is still stepwise motion, so it will still work. And that would take my bass note to an F. And then after that, I might use the original chords for the C minor and the B flat major. And then for the second half of this piece of melody, it uses the same chords, so I might do exactly the same thing again. And if I was to play the original chords first and then my chords, it would sound like this. This is just 4 ways that you can pick new chords for a song. However, you can try out any of the 7 chords that work in that scale and find which chords that you like the sound of. Or even better still, you can find any chords on the piano and find chords that you like the sound of. Because at the end of the day, reharmonizing a song is all about finding unique sounds that you like. But these 4 methods are methods that I've gravitated towards over my years of playing. And if you don't feel so comfortable messing around with chords on the piano, then you might need some good chord patterns to help you do that. And in this video, I go through 4 levels of playing chord patterns on the piano. So if you are interested in that, head on through and I will see you there.